The bucket tipped over at the end of the table, right after the cattle auction wrapped up. No one tripped. No one bumped into it. Someone lifted it and dumped the muddy water straight onto the wooden model my nephew had been building all week. He was 8. He'd stayed up late sanding those tiny boards, saying it was for his grandpa. People laughed. Someone said, "Relax. It's just a kid thing." And that's when I realized something worse than the mess on the table was happening. If you've ever seen a moment like that and felt your stomach drop, stay with me. Like the video, share it, and subscribe, because what happened next changed our family forever. People laughed. Not loud laughter, not the kind that fills a room. It was softer than that. The kind people use when they don't want to look directly at what just happened. Megan smiled, slow and satisfied, like she'd proven a point no one had asked her to make. She didn't look at Noah. She looked at the adults. One face, then another. A quick scan, checking the temperature of the room, waiting to see if anyone would push back. No one did. So she leaned her hip against the table and reached for her drink. Already bored. To her, the moment was over. Linda moved fast. Too fast. She grabbed a towel and started wiping the table, even though most of the water had already dripped onto the dirt floor. She talked while she cleaned. About the heat. About how dusty everything got this time of year. About how kids never sit still long enough to keep anything nice. Her voice stayed light, almost cheerful, like if she kept it that way, no one would notice what she was actually doing. Emily was standing right there, close enough to step in, close enough to say his name. Her shoulders were tense, but her feet didn't move. Her hands stayed still, pressed against the seams of her jeans. I noticed she was staring at a knot in the wood grain instead of at Noah. That told me more than anything she could have said. Noah didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't ask for help. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms tight across his chest, like he was trying to hold himself together. His eyes stayed on the table, fixed on the place where the water had soaked into the wood. Kids usually look around when something goes wrong. They check faces. They look for permission to react. He didn't. Robert stayed seated at the far end of the table. His plate was untouched. His posture hadn't changed. If you didn't know him, you'd think he wasn't paying attention. But I knew better. He was watching everything. The way Megan smirked, the way Linda cleaned, the way Emily froze. Someone let out another laugh, short, sharp. Then someone else said, "Come on, it's nothing." Another voice followed, quick and practiced. "Don't make a big deal out of it. It's family." That word landed heavy. Family. Like it explained everything. Like it erased intent. Like it turned harm into background noise. I remember feeling that familiar drop in my stomach, not because of what happened, but because of how smoothly everyone moved on, like they'd done this before, like this wasn't a reaction, it was a routine. Megan lifted her drink. Linda kept wiping the same spot. Emily shifted her weight from one foot to the other, like she was waiting for permission to breathe. Noah traced the edge of the table with his finger, slow and careful. No one said his name. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the water, not the mess. The silence around him. The way the conversation bent around the moment instead of stopping for it. Talk drifted. Someone complained about the auction prices. Someone else mentioned the weather turning early this year. Plates scraped. Chairs shifted. Life continued, right on schedule. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. You could tell by how comfortable everyone was. By how quickly the room decided it was done caring. I'd seen this pattern before. A sharp comment disguised as humor. A boundary crossed, then dismissed because that's just how she is. A kid told, without words, that reacting would only make things worse. Emily finally sat down. She didn't look at Noah. She picked at her food instead, breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces, like focusing on anything else might make the feeling pass. Robert's jaw tightened. Just barely. If you weren't watching for it, you'd miss it. He still didn't speak. That silence didn't mean agreement, but it didn't stop anything either. Megan laughed again, already telling another story. Linda nodded along, relieved. The room exhaled. The moment was officially over. Except it wasn't. Because when something like that happens and no one names it, it doesn't disappear. It settles. It sinks into the people who learn they're safer staying quiet. I watched Noah. He wasn't angry. He wasn't confused. He looked resigned, like he'd already learned what this room expected of him. Don't react. Don't interrupt. Don't make it awkward. Take up less space. No one in that room thought they were doing something wrong. That was the most dangerous part. They thought they were keeping things calm, keeping things light, keeping the family together. But calm, built on silence, has a cost. And someone always pays it. I remember wondering how many times Noah had already learned this lesson. How many moments had been brushed off as nothing before this one. And I remember thinking something else, too. If this was how everyone handled a moment this obvious, what did they ignore when no one was watching? People laughed. Not the kind that fills a room, the kind that slips out when no one wants to be the first person to say, that crossed a line. Megan smiled like she always did when the room let her get away with something. She didn't look at Noah. She looked at the adults. One face at a time, waiting, measuring. When no one stopped her, she leaned back, satisfied, like the moment had proven what she already believed. Linda reacted fast, faster than anyone asked her to. She grabbed a towel and started wiping the table, talking while she worked, about the heat, about dust, about how nothing stays clean on a ranch. Her voice stayed light, almost upbeat, like she was afraid quiet might turn into confrontation. Emily stood right there, close enough to step in, close enough to say his name. Her shoulders were tight, but her feet didn't move. Her hands stayed pinned to her sides. She stared at the table, not the mess, not her son, just the wood grain. Like if she focused hard enough, the moment might pass on its own. Noah didn't cry. That was the first thing I noticed. He didn't yell. He didn't reach for the model. He didn't look around for help. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest, pressing them tight like he was holding something inside. His eyes stayed down, fixed on the spot where the water had soaked into the wood. Kids usually look to adults when something goes wrong. They check faces. They wait for permission to react. He didn't. Robert stayed seated at the far end of the table. His plate was untouched. His posture didn't change. If you didn't know him, you'd think he wasn't paying attention. But I'd seen that look before. The stillness. The way his jaw tightened just enough to show he was clocking everything. Someone let out another laugh. Short. Sharp. Then someone said, "Relax. It's not a big deal." Another voice followed right away. "Come on. It's family." That word landed heavy. Family. Like it explained everything. Like it erased intent. Like it turned harm into background noise you were supposed to ignore. The conversation didn't stop. It just bent around what had happened. Someone mentioned the auction prices. Someone complained about the weather. Plates scraped. Chairs shifted. Life continued. Right on schedule. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a single bad moment. You could tell by how smooth it all was. How practiced. Like everyone knew their role. Megan provoked. Linda cleaned it up. Emily went quiet. Robert watched. Noah disappeared. I'd seen this pattern before. A sharp comment disguised as a joke. A line crossed, then waved off because that's just how she is. A kid learning, without words. That reacting only makes things worse. Emily finally sat down. She didn't look at Noah. She picked at her food instead, breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces. Like if she stayed busy enough, she wouldn't have to feel what just happened. Linda nodded along to the next conversation. Relieved. Crisis avoided. Peace restored. Megan lifted her drink and laughed again, already telling another story. The room followed her lead. Robert didn't say anything. Not yet. Noah traced the edge of the table with his finger, slow and careful, like he was measuring how much space he was allowed to take. No one said his name. That was the part that stayed with me, not the mess, not the water. The silence around him, the way the room decided without discussion that this wasn't worth stopping for. No one there thought they were being cruel. That was the problem. They thought they were being reasonable, keeping things light, keeping the peace. But peace built on silence isn't neutral. It has consequences. Someone always learns something in moments like that. They learn whether speaking up is safe. They learn whether their feelings matter. They learn how small they're expected to be. I watched Noah and wondered how many times he'd already learned this lesson. How many moments had been brushed off as nothing before this one, and I wondered something else. If this was how everyone handled a moment this obvious, what did they excuse when no one was watching? Emily didn't move. That was the moment everyone remembers differently. Some people later said it all happened too fast. Others said they thought she was about to step in, but I was watching her, closely, and I know exactly how long it lasted. Long enough for her to breathe in, long enough for her to tense, long enough to decide not to stand. She was right there, an arm's length away, close enough that Noah could have reached her if he wanted to. He didn't. He stayed still, like he already knew. Emily's eyes flicked to Megan for half a second. Not with anger, not with challenge, more like a quick check. Then her gaze dropped to the floor. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, like her body wanted to leave but didn't know how. People assume silence is calm. It isn't. It's loud on the inside. I saw her hands curl into fists and then relax again. That small movement said more than any argument could have. She wasn't choosing sides. She was freezing. There's a moment like that when your brain stops offering options. Fight feels impossible. Flight would make everything worse. So your body picks the third one. It shuts down. It waits. Emily didn't scream. She didn't argue. She didn't even look at her son. She stared past him, like if she didn't lock eyes with what was happening, it wouldn't fully count. I remember thinking how strange it was that the room felt quieter right then, not because people stopped talking, but because everyone was waiting to see what she'd do. The mother, the one person who could have ended it without making a scene. She didn't. Linda kept cleaning. Megan stayed relaxed. Robert stayed still. And Noah leaned back in his chair a little more. That's the part that hurt to watch. The adjustment. He wasn't confused. He wasn't shocked. He was adapting. Emily finally exhaled. Slow. Careful. Like she was letting herself off the hook. She sat down without a word and reached for her fork. The metal scraped against the plate. Loud in the silence she didn't notice she'd created. No one called her out. No one asked why she hadn't said anything. The room accepted her choice instantly. That's how practiced it was. Later, people would call it restraint. They'd say she was trying to keep the peace, that she didn't want to escalate things, that it was complicated. It wasn't complicated to Noah. Kids understand these moments faster than adults do. He learned something very clear that day, not from what was said, but from what wasn't. He learned that when things go wrong, staying quiet keeps you safer. He learned that adults won't always step in, even when they're standing right there. He learned that being good sometimes means being invisible. Emily didn't learn that lesson that day. She learned it a long time ago. You could see it in the way she stayed still, in the way she avoided eye contact, in the way her shoulders stayed tight long after the moment passed. Her body already knew the rules of that room. Don't provoke. Don't embarrass anyone. Don't make it worse. She'd grown up learning that standing up for yourself didn't end the conflict. It just changed the target. So she learned to survive by shrinking, by waiting it out, by telling herself it wasn't worth it. That strategy had worked when she was a kid. It didn't work anymore. There's a lie adults tell themselves when they freeze like that. They call it patience, or maturity, or strength. They say things like, he can handle it, or she's tough, or kids need to learn the real world. What they really mean is, I don't feel safe enough to step in. Children who are called independent too early aren't lucky. They're alone. They don't become strong because they're supported. They become quiet because support never shows up. They stop asking. They stop reacting. They stop expecting help. Noah didn't cry because crying had stopped working a long time ago. Emily watched him not cry. I saw her notice it, just for a second. Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. Then it passed. The conversation moved on. Plates shifted. Someone laughed again. The moment officially closed. Emily followed the flow because that's what she'd always done. But something had already changed. You can tell when a child crosses that line, when they stop checking faces, when they stop looking for rescue, when they accept that they're on their own. Even in a room full of people, Emily didn't cause that moment, but she didn't stop it either. And that's the uncomfortable truth. Not that she was cruel, not that she didn't love her son, but that love alone wasn't enough to override years of learning how to stay quiet. If you were watching that scene from the outside, you might ask the obvious question, why didn't she just stand up? But a better question is this: how many times had she learned that standing up only made things worse? Because silence like that doesn't come from nowhere. It's practiced, it's reinforced, it's rewarded. And in that moment, with everyone watching, Emily did what she'd always been taught to do. She stayed still. No one challenged it. No one named it. The system worked exactly as it was designed to. And Noah learned the cost of that system without anyone ever explaining it to him. Noah didn't react the way people expect kids to react. He didn't cry later that night. He didn't complain on the drive home. He didn't bring it up again. He went quiet in a very specific way, the kind that looks like maturity if you don't know what you're seeing. At dinner, he ate without asking for seconds. When Emily asked if he was okay, he nodded too quickly and said, "I'm fine," before she finished the question. His voice was steady, practiced. That's when it started to bother me. Kids don't just stop reacting overnight. They learn how. The next morning, he cleaned his room without being asked. He put his shoes away. He didn't interrupt when adults were talking. He stayed out of the way. Helpful, polite, easy, alone. Emily noticed it too, even if she didn't say it out loud. She watched him move around the house like he was trying not to leave fingerprints, like the safest place to exist was just outside of everyone's attention. She told herself it was a phase. That's what she'd been taught to do. Name it something temporary, something manageable, something that didn't require her to go back and look at where it came from. But I could see it in the small things. The way Noah stopped asking for help with homework, the way he apologized when he dropped a spoon, the way he checked faces before he spoke, like he was measuring the cost. He wasn't becoming independent. He was becoming careful. I'd seen that before. Years ago, in Emily, when she was younger, she learned the same rule in the same house. Don't be loud. Don't take up space. Don't make problems that force other people to choose sides. Emily was praised for being easy, for being self-sufficient, for not needing much. No one asked what it cost her to be that way. She learned early that asking for protection didn't always get you protection. Sometimes it got you labeled as dramatic, or sensitive, or ungrateful. So she adapted. She stopped asking. She stopped reacting. She learned to disappear just enough to survive. Watching Noah do the same thing felt like watching a recording playback. At school, his teacher told Emily he was doing great. Quiet, focused, never disruptive. The kind of kid every classroom wants. Emily smiled when she heard that. She felt relief before she felt fear. That's how the cycle works. When a child becomes low maintenance, adults relax. They don't see the effort it takes to hold everything in. They don't see how much energy it costs to be invisible. They just see a kid who isn't asking for anything. Noah started spending more time alone, not sad alone, busy alone, drawing, reading, cleaning, always finding something to do that didn't involve needing anyone. If you watched closely, you could see him practicing not needing comfort, practicing not needing backup, practicing being okay no matter what. That's not resilience. That's training. Emily tried to connect in small ways. She'd sit next to him on the couch, ask about his day. He answered politely, briefly. He didn't lean into her. He didn't complain. He didn't bring up the model. He didn't want to risk it. There's a moment when a child realizes that pain doesn't always lead to help. When that happens, they don't get louder. They get quieter. They learn to self-soothe before they learn to trust. Emily remembered doing the same thing at his age, sitting on her bed with her door half closed, telling herself she didn't need anyone, feeling proud of how little trouble she caused. Back then, adults called it strength. No one called it loneliness. Noah wasn't angry. That was the scariest part. He wasn't acting out. He wasn't pushing boundaries. He wasn't demanding fairness. He was adapting perfectly to a world that hadn't protected him. That's when the consequences started to show. Because a child who learns to disappear doesn't forget that lesson when they grow up. They carry it into relationships, into workplaces, into every room where they feel tension and ask themselves whether speaking up is worth it. Emily could see the path clearly now because she'd already walked it. She saw how it led to years of swallowing words, of staying in situations that hurt because leaving felt worse, of convincing yourself that needing less made you safer. She didn't want that life for him, but wanting isn't the same as interrupting a pattern. That night, Emily stood in the doorway of Noah's room and watched him sleep. His face was calm, too calm. He'd learned how to shut things off when no one was listening. She realized something then. This hadn't started with the water on the table. That was just the moment it became visible. The real lesson Noah learned was earlier. He learned it when no one stood up, when no one said his name, when the room decided moving on was easier than protecting him. That's when a child learns they're alone, even when they're surrounded. Emily understood that kind of alone. She'd been carrying it for decades. She sat on the floor outside his room and leaned back against the wall. She didn't cry. She didn't make promises. She just sat there, feeling the weight of something she couldn't unsee. The cycle wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It was quiet, efficient, familiar. And it worked by teaching the same lesson over and over again. Don't ask. Don't react. Don't take up space. That's how a child learns to disappear. The question wasn't whether Noah would carry that lesson forward. The question was whether anyone was going to stop it this time. Robert didn't say much after that weekend. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't send one of those long messages older men send when they don't know how to apologize. Life went on, and the silence stayed in place, like it always did. That's why people were shocked later, when everything finally cracked. But if I'm being honest, the shock wasn't that Robert spoke up. The shock was how long he'd been watching. I'd known Robert my whole life. He wasn't the kind of man who did emotional speeches. He wasn't the kind who raised his voice. He fixed fences. He paid bills. He handled problems quietly and expected everyone else to do the same. When things got tense, he didn't argue. He left the room. When someone acted out, he didn't confront it in public. He waited until later, when it was calmer, and then, most of the time, later never came. It looked like peace from the outside. It wasn't. It was control. The kind of control you build by not letting anything spill out where other people can see it. After the auction weekend, I went back out to the ranch a few days later. Emily needed to pick up a box she'd left in the guest room. Noah stayed in the truck with a book. Windows rolled up, like he'd decided the safest place in the world was behind glass. Robert was in the barn, sorting feed. Same routine, same posture. He nodded when he saw us, like nothing had happened. Emily tried to make small talk. Weather, the drive, anything that didn't feel like standing too close to the truth. Robert listened, barely. His eyes kept drifting back to the house, not to Megan, not to Linda, the house itself. Like he was measuring what it had turned into. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind with a stiff cover and a broken spine from being opened too many times. He flipped it open with his thumb like it was muscle memory. Emily froze when she saw it. I noticed that too. Robert didn't hide the notebook. He didn't act like it was secret. He just held it the way some people hold a tool. Practical, familiar, necessary. He wrote something down, a date, a short line. Then he closed it and put it back. Emily's throat moved like she wanted to ask what it was, but she didn't. She never did. That was part of the pattern. Questions stayed inside. Answers stayed unspoken. When we got back to the truck, Emily stared straight ahead for a long time before she turned the key. Noah kept reading like he couldn't hear the air between us. I asked her, quietly, "Does he always do that?" Emily kept her eyes on the road. "He keeps track," she said, keeps track of what she swallowed. Everything, she said. Then she added, like it was normal. "He's always done it." That word stuck with me. Always. Because that's when the question formed in my head. The one I know you're asking too. If he's been keeping track, if he's been watching, if he's been writing things down, why didn't he stop it sooner? Why did he let Megan become what she became? Why did he let Emily learn to freeze? Why did he let a kid like Noah get hurt in front of him? That's the hard part of this story. Not the bullying, not the mess. The fact that the person with the most power in that family chose silence for years. And before anyone says, he didn't know. He did. Maybe not every detail at first. Maybe not every consequence. But he knew enough. Enough to write it down. Enough to remember dates. Enough to notice patterns. In families like that, men like Robert don't stay quiet because they don't see the damage. They stay quiet because they think staying quiet is the job. They believe the roof stays on the house because they don't rock the beams. They believe if they keep everything contained, everything stays livable. They call it protecting the family. What they're really protecting is the structure, and structures don't care who gets crushed inside them. Robert was raised in a world where you didn't air things out. You handled it. You swallowed it. You worked harder. You moved on. If someone was difficult, you managed them. If someone was hurt, you told them to toughen up. Not because he was cruel, because that's what was normal. And silence has a way of pretending it's harmless. For a long time, Robert's silence looked like stability. Bills were paid. The ranch kept running. Holidays happened on schedule. Linda smiled at church. Megan stayed charming in public. Emily stayed easy. Everyone played their part. And Robert stayed at the center, quiet and steady, like the glue. But glue can also trap you. Sometimes that kind of silence becomes an illusion. You think you're preventing disaster when you're actually just delaying it. You think you're controlling the damage when the damage is spreading anyway. Robert's notebook wasn't proof that he was a hero. It was proof that he'd been living with the truth for a long time. He watched. He recorded. He waited. Maybe he thought Megan would grow out of it. Maybe he thought Linda would finally stop enabling her. Maybe he thought Emily would find her voice on her own. Maybe he thought time would fix what confrontation couldn't. Time doesn't fix a system. It feeds it. And every year he stayed quiet. The system got stronger. That's why the auction weekend mattered. It wasn't the first time Megan had crossed a line. It was just the first time she crossed it where the victim was a child, and the room laughed like it was entertainment. Something about that changed the math. Robert looked at Noah the way he used to look at broken equipment, like he could see exactly what would happen if it wasn't repaired soon. Not later. Soon. Emily didn't notice Robert's shift in that moment. No one did. Not out loud. But I saw it. His hand went to his pocket again, like he was checking that notebook was still there, like he was reminding himself the evidence existed, even if the family wanted to pretend it didn't. He didn't speak that day. He didn't defend anyone. He didn't correct Megan. He didn't comfort Noah. He just watched. And he kept track. And that's why the question still matters. If you were me, would you trust a man who stayed silent for decades, just because he finally decided to talk? Because the truth is, when someone speaks up that late, it's never because they suddenly became brave. It's because the cost of staying quiet finally got too high. It happened the next weekend. Same ranch, same long table, same dust in the air, like everything had been sanded down over the years. We were supposed to be there for a simple family lunch. Nothing formal. Nothing dramatic. Emily almost didn't go. She said Noah had a headache. She said she was tired. She said maybe they'd come another time. But Linda kept calling, and Emily kept answering. And by late morning, they were in the truck, driving back down that familiar road like gravity. Noah sat in the back with his hoodie up. Even though it was warm, he held a book open but didn't turn the pages. When we pulled in, Megan was already there, laughing, loud, easy. Like last weekend had been entertainment, not harm. She hugged Linda. She waved at Robert. She didn't look at Noah. Linda met us on the porch with that bright smile that meant, let's not ruin this. Emily walked in with her shoulders tight, like she'd been bracing for impact the whole drive. She told Noah to say hello. He did, quietly, without making eye contact. Then he drifted toward the corner of the room where the old cooler sat, half hidden by a stack of folded chairs. That corner became his spot. Robert was at the table, setting out plates. He moved slowly, like he had all the time in the world. He didn't greet anyone with words, just nods. That calm, contained energy, the kind that makes you think nothing can touch him. Linda poured iced tea. Megan made a comment about how Noah was still sulking. She said it like it was funny, like the problem was his reaction, not her behavior. Emily didn't respond. I watched Robert then. I watched his hand pause over a plate. Just for a second. Then he set it down, perfectly aligned, like he was choosing control over impulse. We sat. The talk stayed shallow at first. Weather, ranch repairs, gas prices. Someone asked Noah about school, and he answered in one-word sentences. Megan smirked and leaned back in her chair like she'd already won. Then Megan said, I'm taking the ATV out later. I need the keys. She said it casually, like she was asking for a napkin. Linda glanced at Robert. Oh, of course, she said quickly. Your dad won't mind. Robert didn't move. He took a sip of water, set the glass down. He didn't answer. Megan laughed like he was being dramatic. Seriously, don't be weird. Robert reached into his jacket pocket, the same pocket he'd reached into before. The movement was slow, deliberate, like he wanted everyone to notice. He pulled out the notebook. He set it on the table. The room shifted. Not a big shift, just a subtle change in posture. People leaned in without realizing, like their bodies knew something was about to happen. Robert opened the notebook and slid it aside. Under it, he placed a manila folder, then another, then a thin stack of papers held together with a binder clip. He didn't slam them down. He didn't throw anything. He just laid them out in a neat line, right in the middle of the table, between the iced tea and the bread basket. Evidence. Megan's smile faded a little. What is that, she asked, still trying to sound bored. Robert didn't look at her. He looked at Linda. Linda's smile wavered. Robert, she said softly, like a warning. Not today. Robert finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Today is exactly when, he said. He flipped open the first folder. I saw tax forms. Old ones. New ones. Names highlighted. Numbers circled. Notes in the margins in Robert's handwriting. Dates. Amounts. Short. Clean sentences. He turned to the next folder. Insurance documents. Claims. Receipts. Photos printed on plain paper. The kind of paperwork that doesn't care about feelings. Megan leaned forward now, eyes narrowing. Why do you have my stuff? She snapped. Robert turned a page. I have everyone's stuff. He said, that's the point. Linda's hands went to her chest like she couldn't breathe. This is family, she whispered. Robert nodded once. Exactly, he said. So we're done pretending. Megan's voice got sharper. You can't do this. You're trying to embarrass me. Robert's eyes lifted, calm and flat. Embarrassment is the least expensive consequence, he said. You've been costing this family money for years. Emily sat completely still. Her fork hovered over her plate like she'd forgotten how eating worked. Noah stared at his lap, silent, like he was trying to disappear through the chair. Robert didn't look at Noah yet. He kept his focus where it belonged, on the adults, on the people who could actually change the rules. He slid one paper across the table toward Megan, a statement, a total. Megan's face tightened as she read. She tried to laugh, but it came out thin. This is ridiculous, she said. You're acting like an accountant. Robert didn't argue. He just reached for the next sheet. That's what people don't understand about moments like this. Feelings can be talked around. Pain can be dismissed. You can tell someone you're hurt and they can call you dramatic. You can say, "That was wrong." And they can say, "It was a joke." But paper doesn't care what anyone calls it. Evidence doesn't ask permission to be real. Robert didn't have to convince anyone that Megan was entitled. He didn't have to prove that Linda enabled her. He didn't have to explain how Emily learned to freeze. Those were emotions. Those were stories people could debate. This wasn't that. This was numbers. This was signatures. This was documented behavior with documented impact. Megan pushed the paper away like it burned her. So what? She snapped. "What are you even saying?" Robert closed the notebook gently. "I'm saying it's over," he said. Linda shook her head fast. "Please," she said. "We can talk about this privately." Robert's voice stayed even. "We did private for years," he said. "Private is how it kept happening." Megan's eyes darted to Linda. "Mom, tell him to stop." Linda looked trapped. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Robert turned slightly, just enough to include Emily. "You brought your son back here," he said quietly. Emily flinched like he'd touched a bruise. Robert didn't soften the truth. He didn't raise his voice. He just let it land. "And he learned last weekend that he's alone in this room," Robert said. Noah's shoulders tightened. Megan jumped in, loud again. "Oh my God, he's fine. Kids are resilient." Robert's gaze snapped to her then. Not angry, not emotional, just precise. Resilient is what adults call children when they don't want to take responsibility. He said. The room went silent. Even Megan didn't have an easy comeback to that. Robert slid one final document forward. I recognized the letterhead. Ownership records, ranch property, names, dates. A line that mattered more than anything else at that table. He tapped it once with his finger. "This ranch isn't a toy," he said, "and neither is that boy." Linda's voice cracked. "Robert, please." Robert didn't look away. "No," he said, "not please. Not anymore." Megan's face shifted from anger to fear so fast it was almost embarrassing to watch, because she finally understood what was happening. This wasn't a fight. This was a reckoning. And when evidence gets put on the table, you don't get to laugh it off. You don't get to call it a misunderstanding. You don't get to change the subject. All you get to do is face the consequences. And Robert was done delaying them. Megan didn't explode right away. That surprised me. She sat there, staring at the papers Robert had laid out, like if she looked long enough they might rearrange themselves into something harmless. Her mouth opened once, then closed again. No jokes, no sarcasm, just silence. That was when I knew this was different, because Megan had always won by being louder, faster, meaner. If she talked long enough, people backed down. If she laughed hard enough, the room followed. That had been her power, and it wasn't working anymore. Linda reached for Megan's arm. Megan pulled away. "You're bluffing," Megan finally said. Her voice was flatter now. "You don't have the authority to do this." Robert nodded slowly. "That's what I wanted you to believe." He slid one more document forward. This one was thinner, cleaner. No handwritten notes, just signatures, dates. A stamp at the bottom that made Linda inhale sharply. Megan leaned in, her face drained of color as she read. "What is this?" she asked. Too quickly. Robert didn't answer right away. He stood up instead. Not dramatically, just enough to shift the air in the room. "This," he said, tapping the page once, "is why I've been quiet." Emily looked up then, for the first time all afternoon. Her eyes met Robert's. He turned the paper slightly so everyone could see. "The ranch hasn't been fully mine for a while," he said. "Not in the way you think." Linda shook her head. "Robert." "No." "Yes," he said. Calm. Certain. "Years ago." Megan laughed once, sharp and forced. "You're saying what? Exactly? That you gave it away?" Robert's eyes flicked toward Noah. "Just briefly. I protected it," he said. Megan followed his gaze. Her laugh stopped. "No," she said. "No. That's not funny." Robert didn't smile. The trust was set up after Emily left the first time. He continued. "Before Noah was even old enough to remember this place." Emily's breath caught. Megan stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You can't be serious." Robert didn't raise his voice. "The land is held for Noah," he said. "Managed, restricted, untouchable." Megan's face twisted. "That kid," she snapped. "He doesn't even sit down," Linda said suddenly, her voice shaking. Megan ignored her. "You're punishing me for a mistake. A joke. That's insane." Robert shook his head. "I'm responding to patterns," he said. "With evidence." That word landed heavy. Evidence. Megan's hands curled into fists. "So that's it," she demanded. "You cut me off. You humiliate me in front of everyone." Robert met her eyes. "You've been using this place as leverage for years," he said. "Money, status, access. You thought volume was ownership?" He paused. "It wasn't." The room felt smaller then, like the walls had leaned in. Megan's voice cracked. "You're choosing them over me." Robert didn't hesitate. "I'm choosing the one who had no protection," he said. Noah didn't look up, but his foot stopped bouncing. Linda sank back into her chair, stunned. "All this time," she whispered. "You planned this." Robert looked tired for the first time. "I prepared for it," he said. "Planning implies enjoyment." Megan started pacing. Fast. Erratic. "You think the community won't hear about this," she said. "You think people won't take my side." Robert nodded. "They might," he said. "At first." He gestured to the folders still on the table. "But stories fade. Paper doesn't." Megan froze. "That funding you rely on," Robert continued. "It's paused. The sponsorships tied to the ranch terminated. The accounts." He shrugged. "Reviewed." Linda covered her mouth. Megan's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're destroying me." Robert's expression didn't change. "No," he said. "I'm stopping the damage." Megan looked around the room, desperate now. At Linda, at Emily, at me. No one moved. That's when it finally hit her. All that confidence, all that noise. It had only ever worked because someone else kept the structure standing underneath her. Someone else paid the bills, smoothed things over, took responsibility she never carried, and that someone had stepped away. Megan sank back into her chair, suddenly small. "You let me think I was in control," she said quietly. Robert nodded once. "You were comfortable," he said. "There's a difference." Emily stood then, slowly. Her legs shook, but she didn't sit back down. "You knew," she said to Robert. Not accusing, just stating. "Yes," he said. "And you waited," she said. Robert looked at Noah again. "Until there was something worth protecting," he said. Emily swallowed. Megan laughed again, but this time it sounded hollow. "So the quiet one wins," she muttered. Robert didn't respond, because the truth was already there. Power had never belonged to the loudest voice in the room. It belonged to the person who controlled the consequences. The person who kept records. The person who understood that silence, used carefully, could build leverage. Megan had shouted for years. Robert had written things down. And now the room belonged to him. The twist wasn't that Megan lost. It was that she'd never really been winning in the first place. The room didn't erupt after that. It emptied. People left in small groups, avoiding eye contact, speaking in lowered voices like something fragile had broken and no one wanted to admit it. The laughter was gone. So was the noise. What remained felt thin and cold. Robert stayed behind. He sat at the table long after the papers were gathered, his hands resting flat on the wood. He didn't look relieved. He didn't look proud. He looked tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Emily stood near the sink, rinsing the same cup again and again. The water kept running. No one told her to stop. Noah sat on the floor with his back against the cabinet, tracing a crack in the tile with his finger. He didn't ask any questions. That night, no one hugged. The call started the next morning. Friends who just wanted to understand. Relatives who thought Robert had gone too far. People who hadn't been there, but somehow felt entitled to an opinion. The word family got used a lot. So did overreaction. Robert listened. Then he hung up. Emily lost invitations first. Playdates canceled. Group chats went quiet. At the grocery store, people nodded without smiling. Conversations stopped when she walked past. She noticed how alone felt different when it wasn't loud. Robert noticed it too. His phone stopped ringing altogether. The men he'd known for decades avoided him at the diner. Someone switched tables when he walked in. He didn't follow. At night, the house felt larger, emptier. The refrigerator was full, but no one seemed hungry. Emily ate standing up. Robert skipped meals without comment. They didn't talk much, not because there was nothing to say, because everything had weight now. One evening, Emily finally spoke. Was it worth it, she asked, staring at the window instead of him. Robert didn't answer right away. I don't know yet, he said. That honesty sat between them, heavy but real. Emily nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just leaned back in her chair, like someone adjusting to a new gravity. The isolation wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, consistent. Days passed without invitations, weeks without warmth. Holidays approached without plans. Truth didn't come with applause. It came with consequences. Emily stopped calling people who never called back. Robert stopped explaining himself. Noah stopped waiting for anyone else to show up. The community moved on. That's what communities do. But the silence didn't undo what had been done. It didn't erase the evidence. It didn't put things back the way they were. Some nights, Emily sat on Noah's bed long after he fell asleep, watching his chest rise and fall. She wondered how many times she'd chosen peace over protection, how many times she'd told herself it wasn't that bad. No one answered those questions. Robert spent evenings going through old notebooks, not to add anything, just to close them, one by one. He stacked them neatly and put them away. He didn't look at them again. They lost more than people realized. They lost familiarity, routine, the comfort of being liked without being known. They gained distance, space, a kind of quiet that hurt before it healed. If you were looking for a clean ending, there wasn't one. No reconciliation, no group apology, no final speech, just a smaller circle, just fewer voices, just the truth, sitting there, unchanged. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was finally still, Emily wondered if silence would have been easier. Robert wondered too. Neither of them said it out loud, because saying the truth once had already cost them enough. The change didn't come with a moment. There was no morning where everything suddenly felt better. No conversation that fixed what years had built. It showed up quietly. The first thing that changed was the volume. Emily stopped raising her voice, not because she was calm all the time, but because she noticed what loudness did to Noah, how his shoulders tightened before a word even landed, how he disappeared before conflict arrived. So she paused instead. When Noah spilled juice, she reached for a towel instead of a warning. When he froze mid-sentence, she waited instead of filling the silence. The house didn't get happier overnight. It got slower. Noah noticed before anyone else. He started leaving his drawings on the table again, not proudly, just without hiding them. He stopped watching faces as closely. He didn't flinch every time a door closed. He still didn't cry much, but he stayed in the room. Emily learned how hard it was not to react the way she'd been taught. How instinctive it felt to shut things down, to smooth things over, to disappear emotionally before someone else could. Some days she failed. On those days, she didn't pretend nothing happened. She came back, sat next to Noah, said, "I shouldn't have said that." And then she stopped talking. That mattered more than the apology. Robert kept his distance. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew how easily his presence had once replaced responsibility. He didn't step in unless he was asked. He learned how to be quiet in a different way. Dinner became routine, simple, predictable. No jokes at anyone's expense, no commentary, just plates moving from counter to table. The refrigerator stopped being a symbol of neglect. It became a place Noah checked without asking. Emily noticed how often Noah looked at her before making a choice. Not for permission, for safety. She didn't rush to reassure him. She let her consistency do the work. Breaking the cycle didn't look like punishment. No one yelled. No one got cut off dramatically. No speeches were made. It looked like restraint, like choosing not to repeat what felt familiar. Emily stopped explaining Noah to people, stopped justifying their boundaries. She learned that clarity didn't require defense. If someone didn't understand, she let them not understand. That was new. Noah learned that mistakes didn't end connection, that silence didn't mean danger, that being seen didn't automatically lead to ridicule. He tested it in small ways. Left a toy out. Spoke up when he didn't like something. Asked questions that didn't have an obvious answer. Each time, the world didn't collapse. That surprised him. Healing didn't erase the past. It didn't make Emily forget how she'd learned to disappear. It didn't make Noah suddenly fearless. It made new patterns louder than the old ones. Emily caught herself once, mid-sentence, about to say, "Don't make a big deal." She stopped, took a breath. Let the feeling exist without dismissing it. The moment passed. Those moments added up. If you were looking for a timeline, there wasn't one. Progress didn't move in a straight line. Some weeks felt like setbacks. Some days felt heavy for no clear reason. But the house stopped feeling tense. Not peaceful. Just safe enough. Noah laughed more, quietly, freely. Without checking who was listening, Emily learned that love wasn't proven by endurance. It was proven by presence, by staying when things were uncomfortable, by choosing action over habit. The cycle didn't break because someone paid for their mistakes. It broke because someone behaved differently. Again, and again, and again. If you were watching from the outside, you might not notice anything remarkable. No grand gestures, no visible transformation, just a child who no longer learned how to disappear. Just a mother who learned how to stay. And that was how it began. People like to end stories with a reunion, a call, an apology, A holiday photo where everyone smiles like nothing ever happened. That wasn't our ending. Our ending was quieter than that. It was Noah doing homework at the kitchen table without checking the door every 5 minutes. It was Emily making dinner without that tight panic in her shoulders. It was Robert walking the property line alone at sunset. Not because he was lonely, but because he finally stopped performing. No one came back to make it right. Linda didn't show up with a speech. Megan didn't suddenly understand. The community didn't hold a meeting and admit they'd enabled the wrong person. Life just moved. And for the first time, Emily let it. There's something a lot of families do when they don't want to face harm. They reach for a label that sounds responsible. They say, "He's old enough." They say, "She's tough." They say, "He needs to learn." They say, "You're independent." And it sounds like a compliment. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes independent is just a nicer word for unsupported. Noah didn't need to be tougher. He needed to be protected. He needed one adult in the room to say, "Stop. Not later. Not privately. Right then." Emily learned that the hard way. Because when a child is forced to grow up too soon, they don't become strong in the way people imagine. They become careful. They become quiet. They become good at not needing anyone. And that isn't a skill you should celebrate. It's a survival response. Robert learned something too. That keeping a family together isn't the same thing as keeping people safe. That you can preserve a structure for decades and still lose the people inside it. He lost Linda. He lost his standing in town. He lost the comfort of being seen as the steady one who never causes trouble. He paid for the truth. Emily paid too. She lost the illusion that if she stayed polite, she'd be protected. She lost the fantasy that love automatically makes people act right. She lost the old version of family that asked her to tolerate harm just so the table stayed full. But she gained something smaller and more real. A home where Noah didn't have to disappear. And that's what I keep coming back to. Family isn't something you hold on to at any cost. If the cost is a child's dignity, it's too expensive. If the cost is your voice, it's too expensive. If the cost is teaching the next generation that love means endurance, it's too expensive. So if you're listening to this and you've had to cut someone off to protect your peace, you're not heartless. You're not dramatic. You're doing the work that should have been done for you. And if you ever wondered whether it was worth it, ask yourself one question. If you were that child in the room, would you want someone to keep the family together? Or would you want someone to keep you safe? Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. And if this hit home, like, share, and subscribe. You never know who needs to hear this before they go quiet again.